All right, and we are back. We are actually live now. We had technical difficulty, but we got that all sorted out, and now we are back. Mom's Basement Streams. My name is Juice. What's up? Happy Saturday. Um, almost happy Halloween. I'm gonna say that for like the next 3 streams I do because it's my favorite holiday. Anyway, since it's Halloween, I want to give you a spooky boy deck tech today. So what did I do? I did Syr Konrad the Grim. This guy is an uncommon legendary creature from Throne of Eldraine. Little weirder, a little more out there. But because of that, I definitely wanted to try this deck tech. I definitely wanted to bring this to you guys today. He's really grinding, aristocrat-y. It's a mono black deck. Mono black is one of my favorite deck types to build in EDH because I think it's janky as hell. It doesn't really work too much. But when it does work, you feel really great. Because, of course, one of the problems you can probably guess right away from running a mono black deck is that you run out of steam, gas ramp, everything super quick. So, what does this guy actually do? So whenever another creature dies, or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Syr Konrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. So pretty much, whenever a creature enters the graveyard or leaves the graveyard for any reason whatsoever, he deals a damage to everyone at the table except for you. And then you can also pay 2 mana, a black and a generic, and each player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. So how exactly is this guy going to work out for us in EDH? Well, if we go right over to here, we can see these are going to be some of the... Let me actually switch over here so you guys can actually see this. Or will you be able to? Oh, that could be an issue. All right, 2 seconds, 2 seconds. This is all still a work in progress. This is literally our second EDH deck tech video. So it might be a little rough around the edges right now, and I ask that you stay with me so I can do this. And look, now we're back. Isn't that fantabulous? You can see what I'm looking at now, and my ugly face is no longer in the way. All right, let's get right back into this deck tech, though, because I'm really excited about this. So these are going to be some of the highest synergy cards you can run in the deck. And of course, if you know what Mesmeric or Altar of the Brood, Mindcrank, and Altar of Dementia do, they are all mill accelerants. You're going to be milling your opponent's cards into their graveyard as well as your own, because that's going to start getting you damage triggers off of your commander, off of kind of like anything that's happening in the game between these artifacts. Mindcrank is whenever an opponent loses life, they mill cards equal to the life they lost. Altar of Dementia, you can sack something and then make a player mill cards equal to its power. Altar of the Brood is whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card into their graveyard. And Mesmeric Orb is whenever a permanent untaps, its controller mills a top card of their library. So if someone taps out like really hard, like 13 things, including lands, creatures, artifacts, whatever, untaps those 13 things, 13 cards are going into the graveyard. And then, depending on how many creatures actually hit the graveyard off of that, since they're all independent triggers, it's going to trigger Conrad, and you can deal tons of damage, especially if you're playing against someone who's playing a really creature-heavy deck. And then we have 2 other really synergistic cards from Standard right now, actually, from the last 2 sets, one from Eldraine and one from M20. From M20, we have Dread Presence. This card is a beast in EDH. Really cool card, especially for mono black. And it's whenever a swamp enters the battlefield under your control, you can choose one. You either draw a card and lose life, or you deal 2 to any target and you gain 2 life. That's nuts. Especially when you consider with a mono black deck like this, the majority of your land base, minus utility lands if you want to upgrade them, are going to end up being basic swamps. Really nuts. Especially when you consider once you even upgrade your land pack, Urborg is going to be one of those lands. So it'll even make it so your non-basics that you might run in the deck for utility are going to actually trigger Dread Presence as well. Really good to get some players out of the game really quick. It's your gas. It keeps you going. You can keep drawing cards. And then there's not really an entirely added downside to it because of the fact that it has the ability to gain you life as well. And then if we're looking over here, Arya, the first of the Locthwain, whenever her or another black creature enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses a life, you gain a life. So essentially this pairs really well with Conrad, because while you're playing things, taking things in and out of your graveyard, putting them into play, just casting your creatures normally, you're still draining your opponents. It's very Aristocrat. Aristocrat is a deck style where you're going to be draining your opponent's life and gaining life yourself by things like creatures entering and leaving the battlefield. And then she also lets you tap her and sacrifice another black creature to draw a card. Once again, this fuels Conrad. It keeps him going. One might argue that you could use these two interchangeably, but I prefer Conrad for this deck tech just because you get the more synergy of being able to use Mill and you have more ready access to him. That's why I preferred him over Arya, because I was honestly, or Iara. It's Iara. This isn't Game of Thrones. My bad. But yeah, overall, I think the synergy there is better with Conrad for being more consistently able to destroy your opponents very quickly. And then, so the next step of this is actually going to be, so we're going to be talking about our sacrifice outlets. So we have, of course, the usual Plague Crafter, Fleshbag Marauder, and Merciless Executioner. 3 drops, 3/1/3/2s. When they enter, each player sacrifices a creature. Plague Crafter, of course, has a little bit of a different text, because if those players cannot sacrifice a creature, they have to discard a card instead. Really good to start keeping the board clean. Gets you creature cards in your graveyard from all over the place. You can get so many triggers off of Conrad just by playing one of these guys. And then we also have some, I guess, Cavalier of Night kind of does the same thing too, so we should talk about that guy first. So he's a 4/5 for 5, also from M20. There's a lot of new sauce coming out that's really good for aristocrats, and I really like it because it's an archetype that I've loved playing forever. But yeah, 4/5 Lifelinker. When he enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, destroy target creature an opponent controls. So a little bit more direct form of a Fleshbag Marauder, Plaguecrafter, Merciless Executioner. You still have to sacrifice a creature, but you're choosing which creature dies on an opponent's side of the board. And then when he dies, you return a target creature card with CMC 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So he's going to keep that synergy in your deck going. He's going to keep the deck alive, keep the game going. Really sweet. And then, of course, we have some really simple sacrifice outlets that you can literally sack an entire board to at instant speed if you need to, and those would be Carrying Feeder and Viscera Seer. Whenever you sacrifice a creature to Carrying Feeder, you just put a +1/+1 counter on it. He can't block, though. 1 mana. And then also 1 mana is Viscera Seer. You sacrifice creature and lets you scry 1. Putting more creatures into the graveyard, cycling things. You can sack your entire board before you cast a Living End to get your entire board back. Fun stuff like that. Really funky. You want to be playing with stuff like that. And then as far as activated sacrifice abilities that require you to tap your creature, we have Whisper the Blood Liturg. How do you even say that word? Liturgist, I think. I probably butchered that. If I butchered that, let me know, please. And I probably will cry, but maybe not. Anyway, 2/2 for 4 mana. You can tap it and sack 2 creatures to return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. I don't think I even need to talk about the synergy there. That's insane. That's 3 points of damage off of that 1 activation, I believe. And then we also have Priest of Forgotten Gods. You sacrifice 2 creatures and then any number of target players so you can select. The thing I like about that too is if you have something in a game, because of course EDH is not a straightforward game as would be competitive formats such as Standard or Modern or Legacy or anything like that. There are politics involved. So let's say you have a deal made out with a player. Priest of the Forgotten Gods can let you decide to not hit that player with their effect, but hit the rest of the board. So if you're playing at a 4-man pod, you have a deal with one specific player to screw over the other 2 players. Well, Priest of the Forgotten Gods can let you work around that player to let them know that you're serious about your pact. Pretty good in the long run at being aristocrat-y as well. So you're going to sacrifice those 2 creatures. And then those players that you choose, they lose 2 life, sack a creature, and then you get 2 black mana and draw a card. Kind of keeps the gravy train rolling. I'm going to say gravy train in every video. That's my goal. So it's going to keep the gravy train rolling. You're going to get a lot of sauce. Priest of the Forgotten Gods, pretty dope card for aristocrats in general. So now that we've talked about these sacrificing abilities and what they're going to be doing for us, oh my goodness, my PowerPoint completely crashed and restarted. Whoa. All right, let's get back to where we were. I'm so sorry about that. This has been a mess of a stream so far. We're still smoothing out some rough edges here. But yeah, so we're going to look at some more targeted removal and some more board wipes. So there's a lot of board wipe options you have for this deck. Pretty good board wipe for destroying legendary creatures is going to be Toxic Deluge, because you're putting minus counters on creatures. And you also pay life equal to it. How many counters you want to be putting on those creatures. So it can wipe an entire board, save some big things on your side, destroy some legendary creatures, whatever you need it to, and it's 3 mana. See, the only problem with this, though, is that the card is about $25, so it's a little bit more expensive. You can build this deck for maybe $50 without that card. So a really budget option to that, which I included here, is Mutilate, which for a mana more and not having to pay any life, it puts a -1 on each creature till end of turn for each swamp you control. So the only positive upside of Toxic Deluge here would be you could play that on turn 3 and wipe the entire board for like 15. You can do that for. You can't even do that on turn 3 with Mutilate, or if you do, it's going to be because you're using mana rocks and stuff like that, and you're actually going to get a lesser effect out of it. Not too great. But we also have another form of board wipe. I would definitely recommend putting both of these in the deck as well, on top of either Mutilate or Toxic Deluge, whichever one you decide to go with there. We have Living Death, where each player exiles all creature cards from his or her graveyard and sacrifices all creatures he or she controls, and then puts all the cards he or she exiled this way onto the battlefield. Confusing words for saying you're getting a ton of Conrad triggers for this. A single Living Death can literally just end the game in a positive way for you, where you drain all of your opponents and just win. And then Massacre Girl is a 4/4 for 5 with Menace. When she enters the battlefield, each other creature gets -1 till end of turn. And whenever a creature dies this turn, each creature other than Massacre Girl gets another -1 counter until end of turn. So essentially, you can just walk your way up the ladder of destroying every creature on the board, as long as incrementally there are things on the board dying that'll let you keep getting those counters. So that can be just an entire board wipe where all that's left standing is your 4/4. You're getting tons of Conrad triggers, and now you have an established board presence too. It can kill Conrad too, which is a little tricky, but I think overall the card's value to be able to end the game is really worth that. And then for just some target removal, a creature that can also just be thrown into your graveyard right away while taking another creature down with it would be Shriekmaw. You can evoke it, which means it literally gets sacrificed the second you play it. Its ability still triggers when it enters the battlefield, though, which is it destroys target non-artifact, non-black creature. Also has fear if you end up keeping it on the board, casting it for 5, meaning that it can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and or black creatures. Pretty good card overall. But now I want to look at something else, and this is called Saving Your Own Deck. We're going to be milling ourselves a lot, too, in this deck. So how are we going to stop ourselves from losing right away when we do that? Well, we're going to have Morality Shift, Grave Purge, and Forever Young. Morality Shift, you're going to exchange your graveyard and library, then shuffle your library. Grave Purge, you choose any number of target creature cards from your graveyard and put them on top of your library. And Forever Young, put any number of target creature cards from your graveyard on top of your library, and you draw a card again. So it's literally just a cheaper Grave Purge that came out in Eldraine. But this is going to let you keep your deck going. And when you are actually destroying your opponent's decks, you're milling them out, you're keeping yourself alive, you're getting more synergy, because as these creatures are leaving your graveyard, you're getting Conrad triggers again. Pretty awesome. Definitely all 3 of these cards are definite includes in the deck. This isn't a strategy of the deck you can't really exclude unless you just want to win or lose like really quickly. Some more expensive alternatives you could put into this are Eldrazi Titans like Ulamog or Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, and Ceaseless Hunger, so the older ones, because they have abilities where when they hit your graveyard, they shuffle your graveyard in your library. That could work too. As far as if we're building it more budget, these are the options I'd prefer, which is why I didn't include the others. And then another important thing is, what kind of benefits are we going to get when we're sacrificing our creatures? So these are all positive benefits for our board state here. So we have Pitiless Plunder. Whenever another creature we control dies, we create a treasure artifact token, so we get mana from every one of those and artifacts on the board. Sifter of Skull. Whenever non-token creature we control dies, we put an Eldrazi Scion that we can sack for colorless mana on the board, also used for fodder. And then Pawn of Ulamog does almost the exact same thing, but there's 0/1 Eldrazi spawns instead of Eldrazi Scions. And then down below we have Dark Prophecy and Grim Haruspex. Almost do the identically exact same thing. Grim Haruspex, whenever another creature dies, you just draw a card, no downside. Dark Prophecy, you do the same, but you lose a life. This is going to be filling our deck, building our board state. If you have Sifter of Skulls and Pawn of Ulamog out, and you can keep sacrificing creatures to them, returning things, building a board state, it's giving you lots of tokens to sacrifice, lots of cannon fodder, lots of mana to go off with. It can be really great. Pairing that with a Pitiless Plunderer can let you just entirely go through your deck almost, or have some really strong synergies going. where every time you're sacrificing your creatures, it's allowing you to do more things. It's allowing you to keep going and try to win or go off on a single turn. So overall, once again, I would consider all of these automatic includes. Dark Prophecy is something that's a little iffier if you want to include it, but I would still say that it's pretty much an auto-include. And then let's look at effects that are going to affect our opponent when we're sacrificing our creatures, or our opponents, I should say. So Grave Pact and Dictate of Erebos do the exact same thing, except Dictate of Erebos costs an extra mana, and you can flash it in. But whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature they control. Pretty straightforward. Makes things like Merciless Executioner and Fleshbag Marauder a lot better, because when you're playing them, now your opponent has to sacrifice 2 creatures once you sacrifice it. So now you're getting 2 sacrifices from your opponent, 2 more triggers from Conrad. You're keeping the board clean. And then if we're looking at other effects, if we want to drain our opponents more every time their creatures are dying, Blood Artist and Zulaport Cutthroat are going to do that, and it also affects them when our creatures die as well. So they cost the same amount of mana. Minor differences once again, but essentially do the same thing. Blood Artist is when Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Zulaport Cutthroat is when it or another creature we control dies, each opponent loses 1 and gain 1. So the only difference here is Blood Artist hits the entire board. Zulaport Cutthroat only cares about your board. So important differentiation there, but really overall, with the amount of recycling and sacrificing we're doing in this deck, the difference shouldn't really be too drastic. Moving on now, we're going to be talking about some things that target creatures in our graveyard and bring them back. So we have, of course, Reanimate and Animate Dead. Reanimate, you pay a black mana, put a creature from your graveyard into play, and you lose life equal to its CMC. Animate Dead, you take a creature from your graveyard, attach this aura to it, and then it gets -1/-0. Pretty straightforward, pretty common cards to play in almost any Reanimator deck or decks where you're funneling cards into your graveyard. But let's talk about Tortured Existence and Wake of the Dead, because they're cards that aren't really used as much, but they're very important to this archetype and the way that this deck is going to end up functioning. So Tortured Existence, it's a 1 mana black enchantment. You can pay a black mana, choose and discard a creature card, then return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So, talking about this from the standpoint of Sir Conrad, every time you're going to be discarding a card, so that creature that you just discarded hits the graveyard, triggers Sir Conrad. All your opponents lose a life, you gain a life. Then you take that creature card from your graveyard, add it to your hand, trigger Sir Conrad. Now you have 2 Conrad triggers on the stack for every black mana. You can just loop that indefinitely for as much black mana as you have. And if we're combining these with things like Cabal Coffers and Urborg, and you generate an insane amount of mana and just keep cycling this back and forth, every activation of that is 2 damage drained from every player. Pretty straightforward how we're going to be winning the game there, and pretty straightforward of how this is such an essential card to our plan and how our deck is going to win. Automatic include, don't skip on this one, please. You got to keep this one in there. And then we're going to talk about Wake of the Dead too. So Wake of the Dead is an instant 2 black and X. You can only cast it on combat during an opponent's turn. Meant to originally be a defensive spell to have some blockers, but you return X target creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield and sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. Oh my god, the triggers you get from Conrad from this, depending on how much mana you have, block an entire board state, pretty much destroy your entire opponent's board state if they're swinging and they think they got you for game, and then get all of those triggers and gain a ton of life and drain your opponents for a ton of life. It's almost like you're getting a free combat step on your opponent's turn. Really sweet card. Please include this one. I think it's a great card for this build. Everything on this page, once again, I would automatically include. But let's talk about some more ramp right now, too. So we're in Mono Black. Mono Black is not known for being able to cheat lands into play very often. So how are we going to be making sure we're getting our mana, and what are some cost-effective ways to make sure we're doing this, and some more expensive ways to maybe allow us to do this? So, definite includes for any build of this that I would suggest are Magus of the Coffers, Cryptghast, and Ashnod's Altar, respectively. So, Magus of the Coffers has the same effect as Cabal Coffers. Pay 2 and tap it, and you add a black to your mana pool for each swamp you control, except it's a creature that costs 5 instead of the land you can just put into play. Cryptghast doubles all of your swamp mana, which it just lets you add an additional black. And then Ashnod's Altar, when you're sacrificing creatures, you get 2 mana if you do it through Ashnod's Altar's effect. And then we have Cage Sun, Extraplanar Lens, and Gauntlet Power. Once again, 3 cards that almost do the exact same thing. They are mana doublers. Each one of them is going to allow it, so every time you're tapping a swamp, you get an extra black mana. Minor differences, of course, mana costs. Cage Sun gives just your creatures and your lands that effect. Gauntlet of Power is for everything but only basic lands. But when we're playing a deck that's running almost all basic swamps because it's monocolored, Gauntlet of Power overall in the long run is not going to be that big of a deal for us. It's going to be something that we can deal with and do pretty easily here. Unless an opponent is playing mono black as well on your table, it's usually not going to give your opponents enough of an upper hand for them to really care about it. And then Extra Planar Lens, the only difference with this card is that you have to exile a land from your hand when you play it, and then lands with that same name tap for an additional mana of that color, or of a color it could produce. So you just exile a swamp, most likely, and then all of your swamps tap for an additional black. This is the most expensive of the three. It's almost up to $40 now. So once again, this would be something that I would only go for if you decide you like this deck and you don't want it to be a budget build anymore. Same thing for Gauntlet of Power. And I think definitely Cage Sun's an easy upgrade for people who are just getting into upgrading their decks from very budget. But overall, I think that should be an okay include. And then I think lastly here, we actually have, all of our lands, our fun lands. So we have, of course, a couple expensive options here and some budget options. Cabal Coffers and Cabal Stronghold almost do the same thing. Cabal Stronghold was printed recently in Dominaria as a more calmed down version of Cabal Coffers. Cabal Coffers is 2 mana. You activate it, same as Megs of the Coffers because it's based off of this land. But you add a black to your mana pool for each swamp you control. Cabal Stronghold has an ability to tap colorless, which is great because Cabal Coffers does not have that. But the downside is it costs 1 more mana to activate, and then it only counts basic swamps. So if you have Urborg in play, which you actually have in this corner here, which makes all of your lands swamps, or all lands in play, including your opponent's swamps in addition to their other types, Cabal Stronghold doesn't actually really deal with that. Cabal Stronghold will still only hit you for your basics. It doesn't matter if it is now considered swamp as well, because it only says basic. And then we have Nykthos, Shrine of Nyx, 2 mana, tap it, and you can add a black mana for your Devotion for black to your mana pool. So Devotion is, I guess if you're a newer player and you don't know what Devotion is, it's pretty straightforward. It's just every black mana cost you have on the board. So every black mana symbol you have on the board equals your Devotion. Pretty straightforward, self-explanatory, I'd like to think. And then some other utility lands we have here. Crypt of Agadeem is actually going to do pretty decent in this deck. Enters tapped, just like Cabal Coffers. You're going to pay 2 mana to add black to your mana pool, but instead of for each swamp you control, it's for each creature in your graveyard. And with what our deck is doing here and how many creatures we're going to be accruing into our graveyard, this is going to be easy business. Crypt of Agadeem, we're going to be able to activate it pretty often here and actually have some real output from it. And then we also have Bojuka Bog, a $2 include for almost any black deck I would consider in EDH, because Reanimator and Graveyard Interactive deck types are just rampant just all over in EDH. Just all over. I mean, everybody knows a friend that has like a Marin deck or Gitrog or some kind of like grindy Golgari deck that's just interacting with its graveyard way too much. Everybody at your table hates it. Maybe you play with more spike players. You have a friend that plays a really spiky control deck that snaps things back from their graveyard over and over again, has lots of flashback, all of that fun stuff. Bojuka Bog, just play the land, exile target player's graveyard. You also get Conrad triggers from that for creatures that are leaving that graveyard. So once again, Cabal Coffers, Urborg, and Nykthos are definitely cards I would include once you want to put more money into the deck. But until then, I would really recommend just going with Agadeem, Bojuka Bog, and the Stronghold. You're going to get the best results from that for your money. For a budget build, it's what I would say. But as far as expensive builds go, if you really like this deck, go for the Coffers. If you already have a Coffer sitting in your binder or anything like that, different story. But as far as that goes, that would be my best recommendation. And this brings us to the end of our deck tech, though. I hope you guys really enjoyed it, picked up some tips and tricks. Maybe you want to build Sir Conrad now. Overall, I think this guy is just super cool. I think he really has a lot of potential to be a great mono black commander. He's still pretty down low on the list on EDH Rec and other deck building websites that list him. Not a lot of people are building him. He did just come out. I think he's going to see a lot more play. I think he's really competitive for mono black. I think the only thing that really steers people away from wanting to play him is the fact that he himself is an uncommon. which can turn a lot of people off from a deck. They're like, it's an uncommon, it's like a 20-cent card, but I don't want a 20-cent commander. It costs 5 mana, whatever. But with a little bit of working with that, I think it really does have great potential to be a scary card in Commander, make your friends actually scared to play against you. And I know, once again, we don't really do like full deck tech videos here with an actual deck list, and that's because once again, I like you guys to be able to watch this video and decide for yourself, here's some basic things I know I need for this deck, but what are some other things that I would like to add into the deck? I want people to be able to personalize their own EDH decks and not just copy a list, because I feel like EDH is the format where you get to build your own list. You get to put janky things in your deck that you have in your trade binder, that you have in your bulk. You find it lying around, and you're like, hey, this card kind of goes really well with Conrad. Why don't I just throw it in there and see how it does? That is the fun of EDH. And that's why I just use these videos as deck building guidelines rather than strict deck tech videos with an actual solid list. And it's just a brain spark too. If you saw things in here that you think I didn't think about, but that just like clicked with you while you were watching it, you're like, I think this card would be great too. That's terrific. And I'd like to hear about those kinds of things in the comment section if you're watching this at a later date. That's the kind of stuff I really like about these EDH deck techs. So hopefully you'll join me again, and I'll hopefully have another deck tech for you guys next week. I'll pick another Eldraine legendary creature probably. I really want to be modern, or not modern, funny, but I really want to be up to date with certain cards that are coming out and make sure that I'm giving you guys the highest quality content I can possible and make sure that I'm keeping up with current things. Maybe we'll revisit some old commanders that have had some really cool cards come out in Eldraine, stuff like that. If you have any recommendations or suggestions for commanders like that, please hit me up, let me know about those, because I'm always down for almost any kind of commander deck tech we can do here on the channel. And I really want to start pumping these out every week for you guys to make sure we have some more cool quality content here at Mom's Basement Games. But yeah, so that's going to conclude our video today. If you're watching this at a later date, thank you so much. Like, subscribe, follow, all of that fun business. If you are live on stream with us right now, just please hold tight. I'm going to switch over to our other overlay, pull up MTG Arena, and we're going to head right into some mono blue mill action, and I'll be right back with that. All right, guys, have a good one, and thank you once again for tuning in to all of the awesomeness I bring you every week here on stream.